Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the UWI St. Augustine Faculty of Law Research Skills series. This is our sixth version of this event for the academic year 2022-2023. And today we welcome two very interesting speakers. We introduce Dr. Ewelina Ochab, who will be talking about legal research in advocacy, and Dr. Andrea Wallace, who will be talking about conducting interdisciplinary research. So as per our normal format with RSS, I'm going to hand it over to the speakers and they will introduce themselves. They will tell you whether they'll take questions throughout or if they want questions at the end. But of course, at any time, you can put it in the chat, which I will be monitoring. So I'm going to hand it over to Ewelina first, and then we'll hear from Dr. Wallace.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you very much for organizing this session and inviting me to speak. I'm Dr. Ewelina Ochab, and I'm a program lawyer with the International Bar Association Human Rights Institute. I also co-founded the Coalition for Genocide Response, which connects civil society organizations, experts, politicians in the overriding aim to address the issue of genocide in different parts of the world. And my presentation today is on legal research and advocacy. And I would like to share with you some of the work that I've been doing with, especially here, British politicians, but also with a few Dutch politicians over the last 6-7 years. And just before I mention a few of the bigger projects that I worked on, I wanted to tell you a little bit how I ended up doing this work. And it started back in 2015, as we were hearing more about the horrific atrocities perpetrated against the Yazidis and other religious or belief minorities in Iraq, the atrocities by Daesh. And I was at the UN attending one of the sessions of the UN Forum on Minority Issues. And there was a Yazidi man who said that what is happening to the Yazidis and Christians in Iraq is genocide. And of course, genocide is a very powerful word. So I decided to look into it. And one of the first assignments that I had was to look whether the atrocities perpetrated by Daesh meet the legal definition of genocide in Article 2 of the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And this briefing was, which is a legal analysis, was used by British politicians, first at the House of Lords, then at the House of Commons, and then also by politicians, Dutch politicians in The Hague and few more. So this is how it started. And that was the first research that I produced for politicians back in 2015. And then I had to also work on a number of other projects, for example, how to respond to the atrocities by Daesh, what are the legal avenues available, and then also looking into a few other cases, including the situation of the Rohingyas in Myanmar, the situation of the Uyghurs in China, the situation of the Tigrayans in Ethiopia right now, but also the situation in Ukraine, and looking into the argument whether the atrocities in Ukraine amount to genocide. And of course, I'm referring to the Russians' atrocities in Ukraine, and trying to develop this argument and trying what other evidence is required there. So this is just a very brief overview of my path to where I am right now. But I wanted to tell you about a few projects that I've been working on, specifically here in the UK at the House of Lords with a number of peers, and predominantly with Lord Alton of Liverpool and Baroness Kennedy KC, who is a distinguished lawyer and member of the Doughty Street Chambers. And one of the projects that I wanted to share with you is the Hazara inquiry. Hazaras are an ethnic group in Afghanistan, and they're also an ethno-religious group because the majority of them are Shias. And the community have been persecuted in Afghanistan for many years, or many centuries. But over recent years, we've seen an increase in attacks against the community, and especially as the Taliban was taking over Afghanistan back in 2021. And as the Taliban took over the country, we've seen several reportings of attacks against the community, especially at schools in Hazara districts, places of worship, and many more. And unfortunately, at the same time, there've been no proper research into the situation of the Hazara community in Afghanistan. There've been no proper research, no analysis of the situation. And together with a few members of the Hazara community, the diaspora here in the UK, and Lord Alton of Liverpool, Baroness Kennedy, and a few more, we decided to establish a Hazara inquiry, which was a cross-party parliamentary group representing both houses, supported by experts, especially legal experts, and also supported by the diaspora. And in order to proceed with this inquiry, we had a call for evidence from the community, from experts, from all over the world, and collected a litany of submissions discussing the situation of the Hazara community right now, but also historically looking into what's been happening to the community for a very long time. And we also organized several sessions, oral hearings with experts, and those oral hearings were online, and experts were joining us from Australia, from many other countries, and explaining their research and explaining what have been what kind of evidence they've been collecting over years. They, of course, identified the long-standing persecution of the community for centuries, but also focusing on the recent attacks, despite the fact that, of course, there's a very limited of information coming from Afghanistan. And as we were collecting all this evidence, of course, we had to sit down and also start analyzing it and identifying two important issues. First, we wanted to look at whether there is a serious risk of genocide. And this is important because the duty to prevent genocide, which is in Article 1 of the Genocide Convention, arises at the instance a state learns or should normally have learned of the serious risk of genocide. So we don't have to wait for bodies on the street. We don't have to wait till the atrocities are already being perpetrated. It is all about the serious risk of genocide to trigger the duty to prevent. And there are various ways how you can analyze this serious risk of genocide. And we looked specifically into the UN framework for analysis of atrocity crimes, which identifies several risk factors, early warning signs of atrocities to come. Many of them are risks that are for crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide, but we focus specifically on the risk factors for genocide. So that was the first part of the analysis and what we were looking for in the evidence that was submitted to us. The second part was to look into the elements of the crime. So we wanted to check and we wanted to explore whether the evidence that we were collecting suggests that the elements of the crime are already there, namely whether the atrocities are being already perpetrated. And of course, as we were analyzing Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, which identifies the legal elements of the crime, we started seeing some patterns as well, that some of the evidence suggested that the crime may be already underway. And last year, in September last year, we published our report identifying or explaining the findings of our inquiry, and confirmed that indeed there are several risk factors, early warning signs of this genocide. We concluded that indeed there is a serious risk of genocide that should trigger the duty to prevent genocide, and putting states on notice that since the risk is there, you have to act. And the second conclusion was that indeed there are some elements of the crime already visible as well. So again, there is even more urgency to act right now. And there have been very interesting engagement with our findings and our legal analysis and legal research that we produced, we as the Hazara Inquiry. We submitted, of course, to the UK government, we submitted it to the UN, to the Special Rapporteur looking into the situation in Afghanistan, and many more. And we've been chasing a number of recommendations, which we, of course, identified in the report as well. On one occasion, and as the report was circulating media, and indeed it received a lot of attention at the time, I was asked by BBC Persia to join an interview. And just before I was online, one of the Taliban spokesperson joined the broadcasting as well, and he said that whatever is happening in Afghanistan is nothing serious, or the community is not being targeted, the community is not being persecuted in any way, and the Taliban protect all religious or belief minorities in the country. And of course, at that stage, we already knew that this is definitely not the case, not only because we knew exactly what was happening to the community, the Hazara community, but also we knew that there were not many religious or belief minorities left in the country. And we knew that because we were involved in evacuations of some of them, and evacuation also of Afghan judges, lawyers, at the end of 2021. So we knew that this was definitely not true to suggest that religious or belief minorities in Afghanistan are protected, let alone the Hazara community. And of course, we had a pile of evidence confirming our findings. But nonetheless, it was a very interesting engagement, and the fact that even the Taliban spokesperson was reading our report and engaging on our report, quite fascinating, I have to say. But of course, we're not expecting that the situation in Afghanistan is going to improve. And indeed, to this day, the Hazara community is targeted, and we continue to engage various governments and international actors on the findings of our inquiry and on our recommendations. So this is an important inquiry that, and of course, a piece of legal research that that I wanted to share with you. A few good developments, if I may mention, from this Hazara inquiry was that in Canada, Canadian parliamentarians were citing our report when they were calling upon the Canadian government to recognize the atrocities as genocide. Similarly, in Spain, Spanish politicians were also engaging with our research and calling for comprehensive responses to the atrocities. And we continue to use it also to ensure that the UK government provides safe haven to some of the members of the targeted community, the Hazara community. So a good example where we managed to use the legal research, the legal analysis, and try to trigger change and hopefully, of course, to trigger the duties under the Genocide Convention. One and main outstanding point that and recommendation that we want to continue pushing others to do is, of course, to bring proceedings before the International Court of Justice against Afghanistan for breach of the Genocide Convention. Not impossible, but of course, as you may know, the international focus on the situation in Afghanistan is gone at this stage. So it's definitely much more difficult to engage states around the world and ask them to do anything about it. But nonetheless, we continue with this work. And the newest inquiry that I'm currently involved in, also here at the UK Parliament, is a Darfur inquiry. And many of you would know the situation in Darfur, especially from 20 years ago, and the horrific atrocities that were perpetrated back then, and also atrocities that meet the legal definition of genocide. And unfortunately, despite the fact that the situation improved for a while, since 2021, we are observing an increased number of attacks in Darfur, and something that requires urgent attention as well to prevent further escalation and prevent further horrific atrocities. And we are at the stage we already collected all written evidence from experts, from the diaspora, from journalists, and anyone who has first-hand knowledge of the situation in Darfur. We are currently at the stage of doing oral submissions. and oral hearings with experts that will continue for the next few weeks. And then, of course, we'll start analyzing the evidence, putting it all together and identifying findings. And if I may mention some of the early findings, is that some of the atrocities continued over the years, and we could actually say that this is an ongoing genocide, a continuation from 2003 rather than something new. The ethnic targeting has never fully stopped in Darfur. We are hoping to publish this report in April, and again engaging whether government officials here in the UK, but also other governments, international actors. We are planning to submit it also to the ICC, and yes, so it's still a long way to go, but this is another important piece of research, legal research, that we are using in advocacy, and we are hoping to bring about a positive change. There are several other inquiries or reports of this sort that I've been involved in over recent years, but the last bit that I wanted to share with you, and before I give also some time for questions, if you have any questions, I wanted to share with you my work on a UN resolution, which was a UN General Assembly resolution that was tabled a few years ago, and that was to establish a UN Day commemorating the victims of acts of violence based on religion or belief. And as already mentioned at the very beginning, this is the atrocities perpetrated by Daesh. That was the first issue that I was working in. I was researching to produce a legal analysis whether the atrocities amount to genocide. And unfortunately, with similar atrocities, whether in Myanmar or in China against Uyghurs or others, there was always a very short intention span on such atrocities. The international community normally moves from one atrocity to another without really doing any kind of follow-up. And especially back in 2014, we're talking about, of course, the Daesh atrocities. Then we moved in 2016, 2017 to the situation in Myanmar, and then 2018 to China and the situation of Uyghurs there. And it just continues every few years, a different case, different focus. And again, there is really no follow-up. And I decided that we need to do a little bit more, and we need to have some kind of hook at the UN when we can always focus on the atrocities, and in this case, atrocities based on religion or belief, where there is the specific targeting of religious or belief communities, and to make sure that we focus on the issue, even whether there is anything happening or not. And the idea was to establish a UN Day commemorating the victims, so a very victim-centered approach to put them at the center of anything that we do. And I work on a draft zero of such a General Assembly resolution, and then I had to approach states asking whether they're willing to table it, because of course, myself as a representative of civil society, I cannot table resolutions at the UN General Assembly. States can do that. And of course, in order to do that, again, I had to show that there's a need for it, to show what is the situation around the world, identify some of the examples of the most egregious atrocities around the world, and explain as well how this day could potentially help to shed light on the situation around the world, and also work towards or ask states to work towards changes in this direction. And the two first countries that approved the proposal were the US and Poland. Both countries have been working a lot on the situation of religious or belief minorities around the world. And indeed, also especially the US, and the US State Department produces a lot of information about situations of concerns, especially under the new Elie Wiesel Act. But also they do regular annual reports on violations based on religion or belief, but also human rights reports, reports on human trafficking around the world. So they do incredible legal analysis in relation to this. And it started there, but then of course I had also to approach many other countries, but also civil society, and make sure that everyone was on board. And indeed, this resolution was tabled at General Assembly, was put to a vote, received enough support, and was adopted. And now we mark the UN Day on the 22nd of August every year. And it's a UN Day, which means that every year the UN calls upon states to mark this day and to undertake various activities in order to put this topic at the center of attention, and to make sure that states work towards policies or laws that protect individuals and whole communities who are targeted, whether we're talking about Yazidis in Iraq or Uyghurs in China, Rohingyas in Myanmar. But these are the cases that we keep in mind when we mark this day every year. And I see that I have only 8 minutes left, so I wanted to leave it maybe for a few questions, and happy to answer if you have any questions. Thank you.
Ewelina, that was fascinating. Thank you very much for that, and telling us how you've used your legal research in highlighting the issues of genocide, and how you've gone as far as to table and get a UN resolution passed. I mean, I think that is amazing, especially as a person from civil society. I must ask, what is the process? How do you exactly approach a delegate to say, this is what I think we need to do? We need to do it for these reasons. I have all the research here, but how do you actually make that first approach? And I will say, anyone else who has a question, you can either raise your hand or put it in the chat, and I will be monitoring that.
Yes, I would say it's as simple as sending an email. Of course, in some cases it works. Sometimes it doesn't work. Of course, when I sent the first proposal, that was already 2-3 years into my research into the issue of violations based on religion or belief, and especially the genocide against the Yazidis. I was already working also on the situation of the Rohingyas at the time, also looking at Boko Haram atrocities in Nigeria. And so because of this research and some publications at the time as well, I had good contacts in different parts of the world, especially in the US. I have to mention that back in 2016, I went to Iraq to visit some of the liberated areas, liberated from Daesh areas. So at the time, that was 2 weeks after liberation, so everything was destroyed. And I visited also the UN just after that to share some of the findings or some of the comments in relation to that trip. And as I was presenting it at the UN, I received a message from a person who was working at the State Department at the time, and he said, "Okay, let's meet and let's compare notes, because I'm just back from Iraq as well." And this turned into a really good friendship, in terms of we've been working on a number of projects together, and also he helped to get the support of the US side. But for example, with Poland, that was as simple as sending an email. You can find all emails for all permanent missions in a so-called Blue Book. It's online as well, whether for the UN in New York, also UN in Geneva, and just write to them all. And that's what I did. I've written to majority of permanent missions, apart from, of course, the biggest human rights violators. I did not bother to approach them, because there was no point. And sometimes chasers as well, but ultimately some of them do read emails, which is wonderful. And also something about politicians. Many politicians, not all, I have to say, but they do read and respond to emails. I shouldn't say it out loud, but Lord Alton of Liverpool, if you send him an email, he is going to respond. If you send it to, I don't know, Boris Johnson, unlikely. And I tried a few times as well. There is no hope. But there are many who work on all those topics, and they do want to get involved. They do want the information. And I think something very important to remember: many politicians, they're wonderful. They want to act, but they need to have a good quality, in-depth research into various topics. So they do rely on external research, and they need good briefings with clear information, clear findings, ideally also executive summary with some recommendations as well. And they are going to use it. So if you go, for example, through Hansard, which is a place where you will find all reportings from the House of Commons or House of Lords, and also some committees, you can see how some politicians are citing good quality research in the speeches in Parliament. So you can see really and live the importance of research. And again, if the research is good quality and is authoritative, they're going to use it, and they're going to cite it and follow up on it. So I would like to encourage everyone that if you have important research that you would like to share, take a shot, send it to politicians, to UN actors, and in many cases there will be a follow-up.
I mean, I think it's great to know how impactful research can be. I mean, we always tell our students, you need to practice your research skills, but I do think it's excellent when we hear somebody talk about their real life experiences about why research is actually important, what role can it play. And I see there's a question in the chat from Kaleem Ali. So Ewelina, I'm actually going to introduce you to subsequently, because Kaleem will be in Geneva next week, as I mentioned before we started. So Kaleem has asked, how do you do this sort of work without becoming too attached or emotionally invested in it, given the nature of it all? I personally think it would be quite hard to do, at least for me.
Well, I never said that I am not too attached. I think it's impossible not to get attached. But at some point, you also try to separate your emotions, your feelings from the work that you do. Especially for the last 7 years, I've been working on genocide, atrocity crimes. And I did go to Iraq. I went back to Iraq 2 weeks ago to meet with some of the communities now 8 years after the atrocities. And hearing their stories, some of the people who have been recently liberated from Daesh. So it is very difficult, but also you can use it in various ways. And the way I try to use it is to have the motivation to continue, because of course it's tiring, of course it's exhausting, but at the same time, if you are in the right place, you want to use your whether connections or your position in order to advocate on behalf of those targeted. Many of them are incredible advocates, so they can do their work themselves. But at the same time, if you work with politicians, you are in the right place to engage them and to make sure that they hear the stories of victims and survivors. But it's very difficult, and I definitely recommend tea and lots of cake as well. It has been working in many cases.
I mean, I think that's solid advice all around. Very insightful, and very much appreciated, Ewelina, that you have shared this with us, and that you've been very honest with your answers as well. So as I'm aware of the time, I will hand it over now, but I must say thank you so much for this insight. And I will be in touch to introduce you to Kaleem, because I think you'd give him great guidance, as he is interested in this type of work as well. So thank you very much, Ewelina, for your presentation.
Thank you, Emma.
Okay, so